everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys another tier maker video. These are really fun videos for me to do, but at the same time they are my most difficult videos to make because I am screen recording at the same time that I am recording with my camera. But today I thought I would tier rank all of Sarah J. Maas's books that I have read. I have read pretty much all of them with the exception of one that I am never planning on reading, and I'll get to that in a minute if you don't already know about it. But yeah, I recently finally read House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book in her Crescent City series, which is her first adult fantasy series. I actually discussed that book quite a bit in my end of August wrap-up, so I will link that video up in the cards above if you were interested. But yeah, today I thought I would tier rank all of the books in her Throne of Glass series, her Court of Thorns and Roses series, as well as the Catwoman book that she wrote as part of the DC Icon series, and then of course Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood. Okay guys, so here is the tier maker that I made myself. I originally had like 6 different categories for this tier maker list, but there just aren't that many books to talk about, so I decided to cut it down to 5 categories. So of course we have the God tier. These are my absolute favorite Sarah J. Maas books. Demigod is, you know, really close to God tier, but they're probably books that I didn't rate 5 stars, or if I did rate them 5 stars, they're just not as iconic in my eyes as the books that I put in the God tier. Then we have Great, Good, and Meh. So the thing about Sarah J. Maas's books, I don't hate any of them, but there are a couple that I just didn't love as much as the others, which is why there isn't like a yikes tier or a bad tier or a trash tier, anything like that, because I genuinely don't think any of her books are trash. So first up we have all 3 books in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. So you may notice that I left off a Court of Frost and Starlight, which is the 4th kind of book in the ACOTAR series. It's really just like a 250 page, I think, novella following the events of, you know, the end of the trilogy. But nothing really happens, and even people that adore Sarah J. Maas like hate that book, so I never plan on reading it. I don't think anything important happens that I need to know about. So first up, I'm gonna rank A Court of Thorns and Roses. I think I'm gonna put it in the meh tier. I did give this book 4 stars, but I fully recognize that most of the book was very boring. And it just wasn't great. Like, I mean, luckily the series improves drastically with the other 2 books of this series, but this first book it just wasn't great. But to give you a basic synopsis, if you don't know any of Sarah J. Maas's books, this is a very loose retelling of Beauty and the Beast. We have Feyre. She's a human girl. She lives in this very poor village, and she ends up shooting and killing this wolf who turns out to be a fae. And so then this guy Tamlin shows up and is like, yo, you killed one of my servants, so you have 2 choices. Either I can kill you right now, or I can take you back with me to the Fae kingdom of Prythian. And so of course she takes him up on the offer so that she doesn't get murdered. Next up we have A Court of Mist and Fury. This is the 2nd book in the trilogy, and I have to put it in God tier. This is a fantastic book of this series. This is also one of those books that after reading it, I realized how much I truly loved it, and I totally understand why people just reread this book over and over and over again. Also, the ending of this book was absolutely insane, and the romance between Feyre and Rhysand, I mean, come on. I mean, I love it so much, so it has to be God tier. Then we have A Court of Wings and Ruin. I think my gut's telling me to put it in great tier. It is a really great finale to the trilogy. I went into that book with very low expectations because so many people were just talking about how much of a disappointment it was from the 2nd book, and I can kind of see where people are talking about. At the same time, it was a very strong book in my opinion. It had a very good story. We still got a lot of Feyre and Rhysand's romance and things like that. It was also centered more on like the war that we were building up to in the first 2 books. But yeah, I thought it was very solid. I did give that book 5 stars. I did a reading vlog for, I mean, not only this book, but I've done reading vlogs for almost all of these books actually. Link those playlists up in the cards above. Like I did reading vlogs for all of the Throne of Glass books, and I also did reading vlogs for all of the ACOTAR books. Next we have The Assassin's Blade. So this is technically a bind up of prequel novellas to the Throne of Glass series. Just to give you a very basic synopsis of that series, we are centered around Selena Sardathian. She is an assassin, and in the first book, Throne of Glass, it's kind of a mix of like Game of Thrones and Hunger Games. At the very beginning of that book, she is like a prisoner at Endovier, which is like this slave/prison compound, and Prince Dorian lets her out of the prison so that she can compete to be the King's Champion, which essentially means the King's assassin. And so most of this book is that competition, which is why it reminds a lot of people of the Hunger Games. But this is the bind up of prequel novellas before that whole storyline. So in this bind up, we get her true origin story about a lot of things that end up kind of coming back in the main series. And I'm gonna put this in the meh category. I ended up giving this bind up like 3.5 stars. It's definitely the lowest rating of all of the books on this list. Because some of the novellas I really liked, like I probably would have given them 4 stars, and then others I gave 3 stars or maybe even like 2.5 stars. Some of them were very boring and very repetitive, and like I said, some of them I really enjoyed. So that's usually the case with bind ups, that I end up kind of like averaging my rating. I do think it's satisfying to read those novellas so that when characters come back in the main series, like you get the full context and it's very satisfying to read. All right, next up we have Catwoman Soul Stealer. So like I mentioned earlier in this video, this is technically, I think, book 3 in this DC Icons series. And I think there's at least 3 or 4 books in this series, but each book is written by a different author, but they are all very popular authors. So there's like a Wonder Woman book that's written by Leigh Bardugo. There's also a Batman book that is written by Marie Lu, and I think there's a Superman book written by Matt de la Peña. I think that's who it is. But this one essentially centers all around Catwoman, and it's her origin story. So then it goes into this whole plot where Selena, who is Catwoman, she ends up going toe-to-toe with Luke Fox, who is Batwing, because Batman is actually out of town. He is away from Gotham City on a mission. And so then Selena ends up teaming up with both Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn to just steal different things around the city. And like, it was so good. Like I gave it 4.5 stars. I think I'm gonna put this in the demigod tier. Like, I think Sarah J Maas did a really great job with this book overall. There was plenty of action throughout. There was also a romance between Selena and Luke, and at the time they didn't know who each other was. Like Luke didn't know that she was Catwoman and she didn't know that he was Batwing. But of course, like the dynamic between her, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn was just absolutely incredible. Seeing like these 3 badass villain female characters come together, like it was so good. And even at the end, the Joker also comes into the story. So yeah, it was a good time. Like honestly, I would be very interested to read an entire Catwoman series if Sarah J Maas ever wrote it. All right, so next up we have all of the Throne of Glass books. I did quickly just put them all in order. So we've got the first book, Throne of Glass. I think I'm gonna put this in the good tier. I personally thought this was a very good introduction to the series overall. Like I said, it's like a mixture of Hunger Games and Game of Thrones. I also remember really liking where the story went and that it did become something that was so much more than the competition. So yeah, I don't really have much more to say about that. I have Crown of Midnight, which is the second book. This one I'm kind of going back and forth between meh and good. Oh, I'm gonna put it in good for now, but like, let's discuss it a little bit. So, like I said, this is the second book of the series, and I remember in my reading vlog for this book, it's a very weird book plot-wise. Like, even if I were to include spoilers, I wouldn't know how to summarize it because, like, yes, a lot of things happened, but at the same time, it's really hard to pinpoint a particular story arc. And what was also very I don't know, I guess frustrating about this book is that Celena's character was actually very stunted. Like, her character development really didn't go anywhere in this book because she was very stubborn. She wasn't listening to any of her friends, like the people around her. She was very, to me, self-absorbed, which of course sets up the next book in the series really well, which I'll get into in a minute. But because her character was so stunted, it definitely affected my enjoyment of the book overall. Yeah, I don't know, like, but at the same time, like, it was a good installment. I still gave it 4 stars. So I think I'm gonna keep it in the good tier. All right, next up we have Heir of Fire, which is the 3rd book of the series. I'm gonna put this in Demigod. I really, really enjoyed this book. I remember giving it 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5-star for me, but this book had a fantastic story in my opinion. For one thing, it really expanded the world that this whole series takes place in. We also got introduced to Rowan, who is the main love interest for Celaena, and I love his character so much. I just loved how much they went toe-to-toe, the two of them, in this book, because Rowan's essentially trying to get her to really come into her powers, but given what happened in the 2nd book, like I said, she, you know, her character development was very stunted. Going into this 3rd book, she was in a very dark place. She hated the world, and so seeing Rowan just kind of like kick her ass and get her to really start to become the woman that she was always meant to be is just so satisfying. I also loved this book because this introduces Manon Blackbeak, who is a witch, and in this 3rd book, she has a completely different POV. She is in a completely different place from all of the other characters in the book. And it was just really cool to like see all these witches like training these wyverns, which are like dragon-like creatures, and seeing her, you know, bond with Abraxos, who ends up being her wyvern. Next we have Queen of Shadows. Oh my goodness, God tier. Automatic God tier. It is to this day still my absolute favorite Sarah J. Maas book ever. From the first page, the pacing was just so amazing in my opinion. There were so many twists and turns in the plot. This is also the book where we really get introduced to Lysandra and how much of a badass she is, and then her and Celaena like actually become friends. Also the book where we see Manon's POV collide with everybody else's, and it's really satisfying. This is also one of those books where like the last 100 pages are just absolutely crazy and insane, and I highly recommend checking out this reading vlog in particular that I did for this book, because my reactions were just like everything. Like, going back and watching that video is just so much fun for me because I can just remember how I felt reading this book and finishing it. All right, next up we have Empire of Storms. I'm also gonna put this in God tier. I remember really, really loving this book as well. I of course gave it 5 stars. Any books that I put in God tier are books that I gave 5 stars for sure. I loved the direction that this book went in as well. I just thought that there was just fantastic things happening story-wise. I liked the pacing. I know a lot of people find this book to be very slow paced. I didn't personally have any issues with it. Also, the ending of this book was, again, absolutely insane. This is yet another book where we see how much of a badass Lysandra is. Yeah, I don't know. I could just like go on and on about how much I enjoyed this book, but I mean, I will say I didn't have as strong of a reaction as I did to Queen of Shadows, but it was very, very close in my mind. And then of course with like that crazy and heartbreaking ending, and you know, the next book of the series has nothing to do with like the main storyline of the series, so like I was just like in shock and heartbroken and just devastated. But yeah, it's just another fantastic book. So then we have Tower of Dawn, which like I said, it doesn't have to do with the main storyline of the series. This book follows Kale when he goes to the southern continent, essentially to try to get help from the government there with this war that is gearing up to happen. And so my gut is telling me to put it in the meh category, and I'll tell you why. I was very frustrated with the pacing of this book. I remember putting in my Goodreads review that the first 250 pages were quite a chore to get through. It was just very slow paced pretty much the whole time, although I will say, of course, towards the end, in very typical Sarah J. Maas fashion, the pacing picked up and some crazy things were happening, and it did end up being a very like worthwhile book. But the first half was very grueling to get through. This book also follows Nesrin a lot, who Nesrin is an interesting character. Like, she's introduced kind of as like Kale's love interest, but then in this book we see that she starts falling in love with somebody else and Kale falls in love with Yrene, so their paths kind of diverge. But I just like never loved her character, and she has her own POV in this book, and I just found it to, for the most part, to be kind of boring. Although I will say I loved Kale's story arc, character arc in this book, because his story reminds me a lot of Selena and Heir of Fire in that, like, at the beginning of Tower of Dawn, he's in a very dark place mentally, but throughout the book, Yrene kind of pulls him out of that, and he starts to kind of get like that fire back in his life. So I appreciate parts of this book, but because of how frustrating the reading experience was overall, I am gonna just put it in the meh category. All right, then we have the finale of the whole series, Kingdom of Ash. This is a difficult book for me to tier rank, actually, because yes, I gave it 5 stars, and I think that's mainly because it was the ultimate finale of the series, and like, yes, there were satisfying things that happened, but this was also a book that was pretty grueling to get through. I thought there were quite a few pacing issues. For now, I think I'm gonna put it in the great tier for now. There were quite a few pacing issues that I had throughout, and I think a main problem, first of all, this book was almost 1,000 pages. That is a very long book, and this was pretty much the whole time a war-centered book. And I've talked about this before. I think I talked about it in my Kingdom of Ash reading vlog, where war books are kind of difficult for me to get through because most of the book is like grueling battles, where like most of the time, like the good side, like the characters that we're following, they were like losing these battles, like they were like winning them, but like by the skin of their teeth, and like that can be very tedious and grueling to read about. There are some fantastic moments throughout, but because it's like almost 1,000 pages, those moments are kind of few and far between. I did love how it wrapped up the series overall. Last but not least, we have Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, the first book of the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. So like I said, I discussed this book quite a bit in my end of August wrap up that of course is linked up in the cards above. I think I'm gonna stick this in the demigod tier. So I gave this 5 stars. I really did love it. I still think that it is the best series starter of any of Sarah J. Maas's series. I mean, as you can see from this tier list, because like Throne of Glass I put in the good tier, ACOTAR I put in the meh category. It is by far the best series starter, but just basing my opinion off of this first book, I don't love the main characters as much as I love the characters in the Throne of Glass series, as much as I have come to love Feyre and Rhysand from the ACOTAR series. I really enjoy Bryce and Hunt, but what I have really noticed about Sarah J. Maas is that I'm finally kind of seeing the light about the fact that she does recycle character types. You know, in all of these books there are very similar characters going on, unfortunately, although of course like Catwoman is like its own thing. That's, you know, a very different universe. But like in all of her fantasy books, I have noticed a similarity in character types and tropes and things like that. And so Hunt, for instance, reminds me a lot of Rowan from the Throne of Glass series, which I adore Rowan, so of course I really enjoy Hunt's character. And then Bryce, to me, is like a mix between Selena and Feyre, but I still think it's a fabulous book. Like I said, it really started off the series with a bang. Also, like I mentioned in my wrap up, there is this side character, Lahaba, who is just an absolute icon. She's this little fire sprite. She's Bryce's friend, and like I just adore her character so much, and she really added a lot to the story in my opinion. And also, there is a really interesting world that the Crescent City series takes place in that I do think Sarah J. Maas has kind of stepped things up with. I think that she is getting more creative with the worlds that she's placing her books in. That being said, like, this is the tier list. I think I am a little bit surprised of where I did put some of these books. I'm glad that the tier list is like pretty balanced. All right guys, that's going to be it for this tier maker video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you have any opinions about where you would rank these books, if you are a fan of Sarah J. Maas, of course. I would also love it if you would like and subscribe, and I thank you in advance if you do. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!